what's up? This is your girl Nicole Reloaded, and we're locked and loaded with another video. I came back on so we can watch a little bit of the live updates, and I hope that you guys enjoy. Please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe, and all that good stuff for your girl. It would be truly appreciative. You better thumbs up, or Donald Trump gonna go back and get out of office now. Okay? You better thumbs it up. Are you ready for the new president of the United States?
Sometimes I say that I want you back, but I don't know if I do. Sometimes I think about the good days we had, but there were bad days too. And I know.
All right, people in the conspiracy theory community, QAnon, are becoming increasingly fractured.
These supporters are now sharing inaccurate information about Inauguration Day through lesser-known messaging apps. NBC News found many accounts even believe today is the cult's long-awaited doomsday. NBC News tech reporter Ben Collins joins us now with more on his reporting. So, Ben, I think one of the things we got to start with right there is just what does that mean, this doomsday? And I know that you report QAnon followers falsely expect President Trump to remain the country's leader even after the inauguration. Why are followers holding on to that inaccurate information?
Yeah, well, they're holding on because they have nothing else left. You know, QAnon is a doomsday cult where the very end of it is the roundup and mass execution in public of Democrats. And they believe that today is this elaborate setup. Donald Trump will remain president at the end of it, and the inauguration is a way to round up all the Democrats. I know that sounds nuts, but they actually fully believe this, and they think that noon is going to be their judgment day. They think it's going to be a true doomsday. So right now, they're all working each other into a lather right now on the internet. On their own spaces. They are very excited about today, and they're going to be very disappointed at noon today.
And Ben, some of the messaging about today is pretty violent. I mean, are extremist experts concerned at all about this?
Yeah, they are concerned. I mean, especially after the 6th, a lot of those people in the Capitol were QAnon supporters. They were wearing Q merchandise. They were notable Q people from rallies, from Trump rallies previously in the past. I don't think a lot of people thought they were capable of this, in part because, you know, QAnon is sort of a passive movement. It relies on the government taking over and the government doing all these executions. But recently, it appears as if they think they need to take it into their own hands. And they've been, you know, sort of partnering with militias and people who have a lot of experience in prepping for actual doomsdays, for actual days where they're trying to commit insurrection. That's what gets people worried, is that Q people have started to meld with militias in the last few weeks since Parler shut down.
Now, Ben, I mentioned a minute ago that they've turned to some of these lesser known apps, and I know that's where you've been finding some of these messages in your reporting. So let's talk about how we got here. Why did this community turn to smaller, unmoderated messaging apps?
So, you know, the big thing is Parler shut down. Parler is that conservative network that was hosting a lot of these violent messages, but they had a little bit of moderation, and there were regular people on there too. There were regular conservatives on there that sort of steered the ship towards non-militant talk most of the time. Now, since then, they have tried to replicate that feed they had, but they've only found extremists on places like Telegram. Telegram used to be used like by terror groups like ISIS. Now it's used by militias, and militias are explicitly recruiting these people who feel adrift after the shutdowns of these services.
All right, Ben, thank you so much. We'll let you get back to keeping an eye on what everyone's saying today. Appreciate your reporting.
Great reporting. New polling from NBC News points to an America that's deeply polarized and pessimistic about its own future as Joe Biden prepares to take his oath of office.
And the data show a whopping 73% of registered voters say that America is headed down the wrong path. NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray joins us now. So, Mark, that is a daunting number, especially at the very beginning of a new presidency. So how are these voters feeling about Joe Biden? Are they hopeful or are they hopeless?
Yeah, and you have to look at the context of what's occurred in the last 2 months since the election. And of course, it was President Trump contesting the election, trying to overturn the results, the riot, of course, that happened on January 6th, a second impeachment for the president. And normally when you end up getting to this inaugural stage, today's inauguration, it is kind of a rebirth where you put aside the politics of the campaign, but we are still kind of in campaign mode, according to our poll. And Joe, what is interesting, that 73% of voters who think that the country is on the wrong track. Not only is shared by majorities of Democrats, independents, and Republicans, but it's also 13 percentage points higher than it was in our poll right before the election. And it's at the highest mark it's been in the last 4.5 years. And so this is a very big challenge for Joe Biden and something I'm sure he's going to be addressing in his inaugural address this afternoon.
And now, Mark, we know another large group of voters say the country will remain divided over the next 4 years, but the vast majority of Republicans subscribing to that belief. Tell us what about that stat that we've got there and what's contributing to that feeling.
Yeah, and again, I think it's a lot of the same context, and of course, punctuated obviously by the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. But Joe Biden ended up really selling himself as a uniter during his presidential bid in the primaries and in the general election. It was often met with some snickering by Democratic folks who were supporting maybe a different side, but that unity is going to be put to the test. And Joe Biden was asked in the last presidential debate by our own Kristen Welker what he would end up saying in his inaugural address to people who didn't vote for him. And Joe Biden's answer was, I'm going to be your president, even if you didn't vote for me. And so I do think that this is one of the reasons to tee up incoming President Joe Biden's inaugural address today, because it allows him to start addressing that unity, which a lot of people don't think is coming.
Absolutely. And these numbers you've shared with us, Mark, lay out just how much work there is to do to get this country, back together, more unity. Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's now bring in our panel to share some political and historical insight into the significance of today.
National politics reporter for Politico, Chris Catalogo, is with us, along with presidential historian Alan Lichtman and NBC News national security contributor Chris Watts, all joining us now. Thank you for being with us. Chris, I want to start with the various crises that soon-to-be President Biden is set to inherit right away. He's announced plans to sign more than a dozen executive actions right after he arrives at the White House. What will be his initial focus and his priority?
Yeah, we have a long list of priorities that Joe Biden has. First among them is clearly the COVID pandemic. I think that they're looking at that, particularly within the first 100 days and the 100 million shots in arms as really the benchmark by which they will be judged. And so I think that's going to be a top priority for them. There are also a number of others that you talked about, including keeping the freeze on student loan debt, looking at rejoining the Paris Accords, this immigration bill that he's doing, which is really going to be a test of how bipartisan this new administration is going to be and how much Republicans are going to reach across the aisle and work with them. You also have a number of other crises. You have kind of a day of jubilation, which we're looking at, a real sense of relief among Democrats out there, but also kind of this trepidation among the Biden folks, because they don't necessarily know what they're walking into in this White House. The transition with the Trump administration was not smooth. There were a number of hiccups, a number of agencies that didn't work really with the Biden transition in a way that the transition wanted. And so, when they start opening the files, when they start cracking the books, I think this crisis that they're walking into with COVID, with the economy, it could be even deeper when they start really looking into what things look like in the White House.
Alan, I want to bring you in here for some historical context. There's 10,000 questions we could ask you to sort of lay out here just exactly how starkly different this is than any other inauguration. Let's just start with the fact that President Trump did not mention Biden's name in his farewell address. We know, of course, he's not attending the inauguration ceremonies. He's already left the District of Columbia. We did hear that he left a note for incoming President Biden, though we don't know the context of that note. We don't know anything in it quite yet. How does this all reflect upon the strength of our country's lasting institution of a peaceful transfer of power, to not see these two figures cross paths at all today?
Well, Trump has done everything in his power, really throughout his presidency, to subvert fundamental institutions of our democracy. And he did it again during this terribly marred transition. But we've seen difficult transitions before. One of the most difficult was after the election of Franklin Roosevelt in 1932, when you had a much longer transition until March 4th. There was a very frosty relationship between Roosevelt and Herbert Hoover. But the Roosevelt model offers us some hope. After all, he came into office in 1933 at the bottom of the Great Depression, with a nation in distress and despair. And how did he bring us together? Not everyone, and really unify the nation and give us hope by delivering concrete, real benefits to the American people. And that's the model that Biden has got to follow. If he improves the lives of ordinary Americans, if he deals effectively with the pandemic, with the economic crisis, with the transition to a clean, renewable economy, then all of this will be forgotten. You know, Abraham Lincoln said, here's why I ignore all of my critics, because if in the end it works out well, none of this will have mattered one bit. And if it doesn't, it won't matter either.
Clinton, very, very quickly here, we're tight on time. Just what, when it comes to the risk of domestic extremism, what's the biggest worry right now for Joe Biden?
I think for today, things look better than they did 2 weeks ago. Meaning there's been a massive response, a lot of defenses, but this won't solve the problem. These extremists have already cropped up, and many of them are even more emboldened and motivated based on January 6th. I think the one thing to think about is going into the summer of 2021 is it's going to look a lot like the 1990s. Remember Timothy McVeigh, Eric Rudolph, these sorts of things. And the thing that's been holding them back is targets. Because of the pandemic, there's not mass gatherings often. So this has limited their options. I worry that as the pandemic ends and extremists continue, we could see more mass casualty sorts of attacks in the summer of 2021.
Clint, Chris, Alan, thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us. So important this morning.
Thank you.
We do want to get a check on your Inauguration Day weather.
Which, of course, means we've got Bill Cairns here. Bill, how are those winds?
Yeah, you can see them already, guys. You can see the flags in the background, some of our reporters, the hair blowing. They should double in intensity between now and over the next 2 to 3 hours. So they're really going to be kicking up.
I don't know if I do. Sometimes I think about the good days we had, but there were bad days too. And I know sometimes I say that I want you back, but I don't know if I do. Sometimes I think about the good days we had, but there were bad days too. And I know.
And we've had some rainy days too. Of course, the rainiest of them all was Franklin Delano Roosevelt with 1.7 inches of rain. And this is January. DC can get some snowstorms, and that was the worst. Was almost 10 inches of snow back in 1909. There's some other big things going on today too, guys. We officially become part of the Paris climate deal, so that's a big deal also.
It certainly is. Bill, thank you so much. Still got so much to come this morning as we await the inauguration of Joe Biden.
Continuing coverage of today's procession next.
See, once again, I had the darn thing on mute and I was talking, y'all. Oh, God. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe and all that good stuff. It's on commercial right now. I have read what Steve has said. Steve says, so we got rid of a racist and elected another. Biden is in favor of segregation and supported Jim Crow, but all can enjoy your new racist in chief. Prima Wanda said, today is a great day. How are you feeling? Drop down in the comments. Would you like to call in? I got a call-in number if you would like to call in. Let me know if you want to call in, and I will bring the telephone lines up. How is everybody feeling? Are you ready? Is today a great day or what? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for this new president? Steve is serious with his comment, y'all. I hope everybody is doing well. Make sure you have your coffee or whatever it is that tickles your fancy and makes you feel all good inside. We just waiting for this to get off a commercial. Here, let me turn the TV on and maybe we can hear something from here.
Try to emphasize the positive wherever we can today, but there is this set of facts before us. It is hard to remember a time when we had been laid so low at the time of an inauguration. The scars of the violence having just been washed off the Capitol after the insurrection, the death toll that you mentioned. What a set of challenges for the incoming president.
You're right, and we've had presidents dealing with crises before, like the Civil War or Franklin Roosevelt on the edge of World War II in 1941. When before have we ever seen a president having to deal with so many major, overwhelming crises at the same time? Our friend Jeff Bennett was talking about them just a few moments ago. Pandemic, people are suffering economically, terribly, starving in some cases. A crisis of democracy. We almost lost that 2 weeks ago in the same place that we're about to inaugurate Joe Biden, and racial injustice that has been rampant and violent in this country for over 400 years. Joe Biden doesn't have the choice that many presidents have of saying, well, maybe some of these things I'll deal with in my second term or after the midterm election. All those things have to be dealt with now.
President uttering the same oath dictated by the Constitution, each sworn in on the same day, January 20th, as prescribed by the 20th Amendment when it was ratified in 1933. We are reminded by the presence of presidents past that this day, this ceremony, is perhaps less of a new beginning and more of an extension. Like the torch passed before each Olympics, our presidents are runners in a relay, protecting and relinquishing the lantern of democracy, making sure their successor, whether political friend or foe, inherits a vibrant beacon. This year's inauguration will mark a stunning departure from such ritual. The absence of the outgoing president. Rather than pass the torch, critics say he used it to set the Capitol grounds ablaze, inciting an insurrection just 2 weeks ago in the very place the inauguration will happen. Now, with the smoke still smoldering, President-elect Joe Biden will take the oath, deliver his address, and try to heal an unsteady nation still feeling the aftershocks of an immeasurable political earthquake. Like so many inaugural addresses before, unity will be the priority.
May we know unity without conformity.
We as a society must rise up united.
There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America.
Our unity, our union, is a serious work of leaders and citizens in every generation.
For all the novelty, all the change that comes with a new leader, we are reminded each inauguration is really more like a bridge, connecting presidents and leading us forward, torch in hand, democracy's flame still burning. We'll watch that torch burn in just a couple hours this morning.
Joe, a beautiful piece. Had an incredible essay there.
Our inauguration coverage continues.
Let's turn now to an NBC News special report.
From NBC News, the inauguration of Joseph R. Biden Jr. Here's Lester Holt and Savannah Guthrie.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our live coverage of the inauguration of Joseph R. Biden Jr. as the 46th president of the United States. The president-elect right now at this moment attending a service at Washington St. Matthew's Cathedral, accompanied by a bipartisan delegation of congressional leaders. But in less than 2 hours, he will take the oath of office at the Capitol, and Kamala Harris will be sworn in as vice president. Truly a historic day.
Yeah, and we just saw the Capitol all dressed up and ready to go. It's historic because the current president, Donald Trump, chose not to be here. He left town this morning after a ceremony at Joint Base Andrews. He's now flying home aboard Air Force One to Florida. He's the first president not to attend his successor's inauguration since the Civil War. There's a lot of reasons there will be history today. That's one of them.
Yeah, and he did wish the new administration the best and said he would pray for them. There is so much that's different about today's ritual of democracy. No crowd of thousands on the mall because of the pandemic, which has now claimed more than 400,000 American lives and counting. Extremely tight security throughout Washington because of the assault on the Capitol, of course, 2 weeks ago today by a mob of Trump supporters intent on stopping the electoral vote count. That riot led to the impeachment of Donald Trump just 1 week later. His Senate trial is still pending.
But today is to look forward. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have their day ahead of them, pomp, ceremony, and also a day of great ambition. They say they intend to hit the ground running, eager to put their agenda in place. And obviously, some of that will have to do with taking part some of the Trump legacy as well. We want to give you an overview of what the events of the day will look like. As mentioned, the president-elect Joe Biden just finishing up that church service in Washington, D.C.
In just a few moments, the events move just 2 miles to the southeast to the U.S. Capitol. The swearing-in ceremony will get underway at 11:15 Eastern Time on what's known as the west front of the U.S. Capitol, with Lady Gaga singing the national anthem and performances by Jennifer Lopez and Garth Brooks. And at 12 noon, Joe Biden will officially become the 46th president, taking the oath of office and delivering his inaugural address in the very spot where those rioters stormed the Capitol exactly 2 weeks ago. The contrast couldn't be any more striking.
Yeah, and then this afternoon, just after 2 o'clock, President Biden, Vice President Harris, and their spouses will be joined by former first couples Obama, Bush, and Clinton for a wreath-laying ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. Then comes the inaugural parade, which, of course, will be different this year. It will mostly be virtual, a nod to, of course, the pandemic and also security concerns. We will see the new president and vice president being escorted to the White House, but we will not see those usual crowds.
And capping off the day in place of the usual inaugural balls, tonight a primetime star-studded televised special hosted by Tom Hanks that will get underway at 8:30 Eastern Time.
So we've got a lot to get to today. Let's get started. Our team is in place. Let's start with NBC's political director, Meet the Press moderator Chuck Todd, also Chief Washington correspondent Andrea Mitchell. Not first inauguration for either of them. Chuck, I'll start with you. We saw the president's send-off. What did you make of it?
Well, look, I mean, as we wrote this morning in First Read, 2 months ago, right after we declared Joe Biden the winner, I think you would have said, boy, Donald Trump was a failed one-term president, but a successful leader of a political movement that is here to stay. 2 months later, he imploded in his inability to accept the loss. And here he is sort of in a somewhat having to leave Washington in a bit of a humiliating manner, nobody really wanting to send him off. And he sort of slinks away. And I would argue that might be the biggest favor he's done for the country and for Joe Biden today. You know, we're going to talk a lot about him not being here. I think that is a good thing. It allows Joe Biden, it allows him to start to turn the page. The country clearly wanted to turn the page. I think this town, after what happened 2 weeks ago, desperately wants to see sort of a new tone. And so, look, this is a moment Joe Biden obviously has been thinking about for nearly 50 years. But this really is, I think, a challenge like no incoming president has had. You know, we talk about Barack Obama had a challenge, certainly George W. Bush and the way he won had a challenge. But really, we're looking at FDR, Abraham Lincoln, Lincoln level of challenges facing Joe Biden, the most experienced person that we've ever had elected president of the United States.
All right, Chuck, thanks very much. Let's bring in Andrea Mitchell right now. Andrea, what are your thoughts?
Well, the contrast also with the outgoing President Trump having to send these invitations, please bring 5 friends with you to Joint Base Andrews, to try to create this rally for himself with the music playing, blaring music that was more similar to a political rally, and then saying farewell, thank you, have a good life, we'll see you soon. It was awkward and tentative on their last flight on Air Force One, and that was carefully timed because he wants to arrive in Florida while he can still call it Air Force One, which at 11:59, as of 11:59, he will not be able to call it that anymore. It will be Air Force One for, of course, Joe Biden, the new president. Last night, interestingly, in an exclusive interview on MSNBC with Joy Reid, Speaker Pelosi was asked about, the noon transition of power, and she said, not noon, 11:59. She has that constitutional moment emblazoned in her mind, and it was very clear that there is no forgiveness, that there will be accountability, and that this president is leaving as the only president impeached twice, and also facing a Senate trial with Chuck Schumer now in the majority. But very importantly today, the bipartisan prayer, the Mass at St. Matthew's, the invitation of the incoming president to have both Schumer and Mitch McConnell there. That tells you so much, as well as Mitch McConnell's comments yesterday, not by any means absolving President Trump. And there is the possibility that he's leaving himself open to conviction. The other thing about Donald Trump's departure was a passing thank you to Mike Pence. The awkwardness, the divide between the two was so pronounced after the president did not call his vice president, when Vice President Pence, his wife Karen, and the rest of their family, their children, were in lockdown and were in dire danger, as we know from subsequent videos of that horrible insurrection of people hunting him down.
And we are watching, Andrea, as you've been speaking, these images on the east front of the Capitol, where we're starting to see some of those who are invited today arrive and take their places. Usually there would be tens of thousands here, but in this case, only about 1,000 invited guests, a nod to both security and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. We also have former presidents already in the vicinity. I mentioned earlier, President Bush and Laura Bush are there. The Obamas just arrived moments ago. The Clintons have been seen on the east front of the Capitol. And so we're starting to see the pieces and the people in place for the inaugural ceremony, which will take place in about 2 hours from now. Let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander. He's in Lafayette Park, which is just outside the White House, of course. Peter, good morning.
Savannah, good morning to you. You note that the Obamas have now arrived at the Capitol, and perhaps it's only fitting that former President Barack Obama was the first to formally congratulate President Joe Biden on Twitter just moments ago, saying, "Congratulations to my friend, President Joe Biden. This is your time." Those two men from different backgrounds, races, and generations became the best of friends, brothers, as aides have described to me. That relationship formed during their time in office. They said initially, aides did, that it was sort of a relationship of convenience, but they grew so close together, and it will be the Obamas among the other past presidents who helped celebrate this crucial moment in American history as Joe Biden is sworn in as the country's 46th president. In much the same way that Donald Trump was this sort of great disruptor, this insurgent candidate that came to Washington to change Washington, Joe Biden is in many ways a president who knows Washington better than any before him, serving almost 50 years here. The senator from Delaware, just a young man when he first arrived, now in his more senior years as the statesman who will lead this country. His aides suggest through this awful pandemic, of course, and the challenges that it has brought to the economy as well. This morning, it was by design that Biden went to that church service surrounded by the bipartisan congressional leaders, by design that his first act here in Washington during his arrival yesterday was that national moment of mourning mourning and remembrance, the lighting of 400 columns of light to remember the lives of 400,000 Americans lost, a sort of collective catharsis. So while today will be about pomp and pageantry, it will also be about policy. His inaugural address, aides say, focused not on Donald Trump, not on Joe Biden, but on the people of America, the people who Joe Biden has said need healing during this very difficult time. Savannah and Hoda and Lester.
Yeah, beautiful shot of that field of flags on the National Mall. And before that, we saw a little glimpse of the president-elect and Dr. Biden at that church service, the Mass. Jay Johnson was Secretary of Homeland Security under President Obama and joins us. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for joining us. You know, I note that the pictures we're seeing right now, we're not seeing that ring of steel and armed troops, but they're there. They won't be a part of the large image we're watching today. But going forward, how does that end? Because nothing that we're going to see today is necessarily going to stop these extremist feelings that overflowed 2 weeks ago.
Lester, that's a good question. For a long time, the U.S. Capitol has been considered the people's house. We resisted the notion of a fence, a barrier around it, like we have at the White House or the Pentagon or other federal buildings or military installations. And in my lifetime, and I have a picture when I was about 8 years old of my family and I parking our car in public parking just steps away from that eastern front of the Capitol that you just showed there in the images. All that's changed now. And every time we enhance security, whether it's at a federal building or an airport by way of screening, we're reluctant to go back. We're reluctant to take it off. I'd like to believe that all of the security we see right now around the Capitol is just a temporary state. It really should be the people's house. You know, as I'm sure you know, there's a visitor center now with a lot of security. But there is something to be said for access by the American people to their representatives in Congress at the U.S. Capitol. And so I'm really hoping this is temporary. It is very, very different from the inauguration of 4 years ago, where I had the responsibility for the overall security of the event. It's because of the situation we're in right now.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
You bring up a good point, Secretary Johnson, and you're in a unique vantage point here that you actually did oversee the security 4 years ago. And when you compare what was done then to what is happening now, I mean, it's just a huge ramp up by necessity.
This we like to say peaceful transfer of power. It's a cliche. This was not a peaceful transfer of power as a result of the events of January 6th. And none of us should ever take that for granted again. You know, we have a resilient democracy, but it depends very much upon the maturity and the responsibility of those who lead our government, who exercise power in Washington. And we now know what the dangers are of a threat to our democracy if those with a microphone, those with power, incite violence, encourage people to come to Washington and do what they did 2 weeks ago.
There was a time we could be closer to our presidents. This was not only a threat against the Capitol, this was ultimately a threat against democracy. And you have to ask about Joe Biden. Okay. Will he be behind an even thicker wall of security? Will that separate him more from the American people?
Well, the Secret Service, which protects the president, is, in my judgment, the best protection agency in the world. When I was at DHS, I oversaw the Secret Service. They're part of DHS. I was also a protectee myself of the Secret Service for 3 years. And I know from personal experience that the Secret Service knows how to do this while also granting their protectee, particularly the president, access to the American people. They will adjust and they will do an extraordinary job.
Secretary Jay Johnson, always good to have you on. Thank you for coming on with us today.
And we've been watching, as we've been having this conversation, some of the arrivals, some of the congressional leaders, saw Senator Klobuchar, saw Senator Schumer, some of the House leaders arriving, and we are starting to see a motorcade. So the things are starting to happen there on the west front of the Capitol where the inauguration will take place. And we turn now in our coverage to Mike Barnicle, a veteran journalist and NBC News contributor, and also a longtime friend of the Bidens. And I think it's fair to call you, Mike, something of a Biden whisperer. I wonder if you've been in touch and if you could share what you feel his mindset is as he takes this office and takes on challenges that perhaps no one could have imagined even a year ago.
Yeah, that's for sure, Savannah. I think one word would describe where his mind is right now: determined. I think he's determined to just change the country, to calm the country down. And I think a lot of it is encapsulated in something he said last night at the Reflecting Pool that might stand out and have more resonance than anything he says in the upcoming inaugural address. When he said last night, to heal is to remember. And as all the pictures have shown us, and as you and Lester have been talking about, I mean, the inauguration is taking place today in a city that's virtually empty. There are no huge crowds. There are no huge numbers on the stand behind the president-elect as he takes the oath of office. But I think he urges us to remember so much that we seem to have forgotten in the most recent past, namely the 400,000 plus victims of the virus who have died in anonymity and loneliness, many of them. To remember what this country is all about, to remember what this country can do when it's determined to do it, to remember that government works efficiently for people and helps lift up people when government is used properly. So I think that's on his mind going forward. And I think the biggest distinction between today and the past literally 48 months, we can now look to the Oval Office and look to the President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, and say with certainty, he is a good man.
Mike, he will make pledges today during his speech and goals. But when it comes to this idea of unity, what's the measure of success?
Boy, that's a good question, Lester. I mean, the measure of success, I think, immediately will be things like, do you get the massive appropriation bill through Congress? The update of the CARES Act. Do you get another $1 trillion or $2 trillion to help people who are desperate for help? I mean, people who have been thrown out of their homes, lost their homes, been evicted from their apartments, to get the logistics down properly for the distribution of the vaccine. Can that be done successfully? Can he begin to deal with the infrastructure problems of this country? I think we're going to find out very quickly within the first 3 months whether the Congress and the Republicans will balk at everything and try to obstruct everything, or will they be forced, because of the reality around us, to contribute to governance for the first time in 4 years. I think that would be some small measure of success, definition of success.
But and to that point, I mean, it's not just what you get done on a bipartisan basis, it's also the tone. And I wonder where you think he'll be in terms of uniting and speaking to those who didn't vote for him. I mean, it's almost, many presidents at their inaugurations or on election night will say, I'll be your president whether you voted for me or not. But one thing President Trump did say this morning that was true is that 70 million plus people voted for him. That's a record. More people voted for Joe Biden. That's a record too. We had one of the greatest turnout elections we've ever had. But the point is that there are tens of millions who may feel differently about the scene that they'll watch today. And how will he reach out to them?
Savannah, I really believe that Joe Biden is a person who is grounded in the concept of healing. and he's determined to heal the nation. But healing is the key, and he knows what healing is all about. He's learned it from a life of horrific loss that everyone knows he's endured. But he has endured it, and he has healed himself, and he knows the magic of healing. And I think that's going to be part of the component part of him dealing with Congress, with dealing with a Mitch McConnell. The only way this country is going to get better quickly is if both sides talk to one another at the political level. And I think at the citizenry level, you, me, people around this country, the 74 million who voted for Donald Trump, I hate to say his name, but the 74 million who voted for the former president, combined with the 81 plus million who voted for Joe Biden, I think he can address all of them. It's in his nature. He's an understanding guy. He's a genuine human being. He's grounded. He's been grounded for as long as I've known him in the faith that he holds, in the faith in his family, in the faith of the Republic, and in the faith of being able to do his job. So we're going to find out, but I think he's got a PhD in healing, and he's going to bring that to the country.
Mike Barnicle, always good to get your perspective after all these years of knowing the Biden family. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Let's check in with Kristen Welker right now. She's there on the west front of the Capitol as we see members of Congress gathering, taking their seats. And you'll note the seats are spread out as we've become accustomed to in this age of COVID. Kristen.
Well, Lester, we just watched Senator Ted Cruz arrive, of course, one of the Republican senators that questioned the legitimacy of the election results, which really underscores the task before President-elect Joe Biden as he tries to unify a deeply divided nation. We are talking about all of the ways in which this inauguration is unprecedented. Well, here is one thing that makes it traditional. The fact that Joe Biden will be sworn in on the west front of the U.S. Capitol. And that is so significant. That can't be understated. Why? Because just 2 weeks ago, there was an insurrection against this Capitol, and the very idea of holding these historic events outside was in question. And so we know that Joe Biden was determined to do it. He thought that was important. It was important to show that strength and important to try to set the tone that it is time for the country to move beyond those horrific events of 2 weeks ago. And then, of course, just 1 week ago, last Wednesday, President Trump was impeached. And so it is that incredibly complicated backdrop that Joe Biden will be sworn in against, and his first and most difficult task is going to be to try to unify this nation. His inaugural address will call for unity, will call for themes of healing, as you were just talking about, but then the really hard work begins. And we are told he's going to try to get down to work today, passing 15 executive orders that will aim to address the myriad of crises that he is dealing with, everything from COVID-19 to the economy and racial disparities. So the question is, though, as President-elect Biden tries to work on legislation, it gets more complicated. Will he be able to reach across the aisle? There you have Senator Bernie Sanders, of course, one of Joe Biden's rivals during the Democratic primary, someone now who is staunchly in his corner, Cory Booker as well arriving. And again, it can't be overstated, just the fact that these lawmakers are here for this inauguration, which will take place on the West Front Capitol, is significant and is one step toward a return to normalcy after that attack on the U.S. Capitol. Savannah and Lester.
All right, Kristen.
Peggy Noonan joins us. She was a principal speechwriter for President Reagan and NBC News political contributor now. And Peggy, as we look at these images, and we do, of course, recall what was going on 2 weeks ago at the United States Capitol. And now we see congressional leaders coming together and being present for the swearing in of a new president. And I just started thinking about how the attack was, yes, an attack on democracy, but also attack on a separate co-equal branch of government. And it does feel in these last few days and weeks since then, you detect a note of defiance on the part of the Congress that goes beyond party. I noticed that Mitch McConnell keeps talking about the Article 1 branch in the Constitution, sort of reasserting the primacy of the United States Congress. And I feel that is one of the threads that we can detect today.
Yeah, I think so, too. I think I have been heartened to see those members of Congress who have come forward and who have spoken bluntly and truthfully about the events of the insurrection. Mitch McConnell was completely right, and others, in saying, look, this was a crowd more or less directed or incited to enter the legislative branch, excited by the executive branch. This was a grave constitutional misstep is the word I'm thinking of, but that's not serious enough. Maybe sin is. And I think, you know, that incident, 1/6, what happened during the insurrection is not just going to disappear. It's going to linger for a really long time. And I think more members of Congress, I think, have become very sober-minded about the historical moment we're in. And I hope, you know, after every tragedy, if you will, there is always opportunity. You know, tragedies aren't just sad, they open up new possibilities. So I would hope the president-elect could see that opening, and a bunch of sober and serious and experienced people might come together and have some interesting conversations.
Yeah, not sure if we're looking at the presidential-elect motorcade here. I believe we are, making its way to the Capitol. And Peggy, as we watch that, how specific do you think Joe Biden will be in his inaugural address in speaking directly to members of Congress who, up until the end, insisted that his presidency would be illegitimate?
I think they were proven to be on the losing side of that argument, yes. So I would love to see, and Joe Biden well knows that, knew it from the beginning, so I would love to see a long-suffering generosity on his part. As for the words that will be said today, you know, this nation manufactures a lot of words. We are inundated with words every day. We operate under a mountain of them. I think actions will be more eloquent and persuasive in the future. I always say, everybody said Ronald Reagan was such an optimistic guy. He let us feel optimism again. And I say, no, he didn't just smile and make you optimistic. He was confident. He felt he and the American people could move forward and make progress. And as people saw that happening, it made them feel optimistic. So it's all in the actions, Lester. And man, I would love to see Joe Biden tomorrow go up to Congress and sit down, have a cup of coffee with a bunch of people and say, we're turning the page together. What can we accomplish?
Well, attending a church service together is probably a good start toward that end, and we saw that just a short time ago. Peggy Noonan, thanks.
And we've heard a lot this morning, people remarking on the healing that needs to take place in the nation, but anybody who's ever had a wound knows that most wounds don't heal overnight. This is where that work begins, and we will begin to witness it today as this inauguration takes place and the inaugural speech, and we are watching these scenes as the dignitaries arrive at the Capitol.
Kamala Harris there and her husband now exiting the vehicle.
And there's the president-elect also arriving just now onto the steps of the Capitol. And we've got about an hour and a half to go before our Constitution prescribes that the new president will be sworn in.
Yeah, let's go to Craig Melvin, who's on the east front of the Capitol here as we watch the president-elect make his arrival. Craig?
Lester, right now, you see the president-elect there. From our vantage point, we also see the soon-to-be First Lady as well, Dr. Jill Biden. There she is, Dr. Biden, putting on her gloves there. It is quite chilly. In fact, there were some snow flurries here in the nation's capital a short time ago. And Senator Harris, soon-to-be Vice President Harris, and I screwed this up earlier. I want to make sure I get it right this time. The soon-to-be First Gentleman, Doug Emhoff, all of them set to make their way up the steps. We should point out here, as they get ready to proceed up the steps, they are flanked on both sides by members of the Capitol Police. And they are being flanked by members of the Capitol Police because of obviously what happened here 2 weeks ago, as we see the soon-to-be President and First Lady.
All right, now what we're watching is Inauguration Day follow on the follow on the latest, okay? Let me throw in my little clip that I made. We are doing a reaction video to live coverage update live when Nicole Reloaded, and we loaded up with another video. Please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Okay, and to Miss Dr. Biden, here you go, girl.
Hey, Queen. Girl, you have done it again, constantly raising the bar for us all and doing it flawlessly. I'd say I'm surprised, but I know who you are. I've seen it up close and personal. Girl, you make me so proud, and I love you.
Sometimes I say that I want you back, but I don't know if I do. Sometimes I think about the good days we had, but there were bad days too. And I know sometimes I say that I want you back, but I don't know if I do. Sometimes I think about the good days we had, but there were bad days too. And I know
between the president-elect, his spouse, and of course the outgoing president.
Andrea,
so that's why this is so different.
I just was told in my ear by a producer that Eugene Goodman, the Capitol Police officer escorting Vice President-elect Harris, is some will recognize from heroic actions that day as the insurrectionists and rioters broke into the Capitol. He was the officer who, in a moment of great poise, led them in a different direction away from an open door to the Senate chamber. And in that moment, many have said, perhaps saved untold lives. And who knows what could have happened but for his heroism. And he, of course, is getting a place of honor today.
All right.
In fact, they are voting to give him the Congressional Gold Medal for that bravery and for the brilliance, really, of his quick decision-making. Recall that he was drawing them up to the top of the second floor, the steps there. And on that landing at the second floor, he quickly spotted that if they had turned to the left, they would have been 100 feet from where Vice President Pence and his family were then being secluded by the Secret Service, having just been taken off the podium of the Senate chamber just minutes before. Instead, he drew them to the right and saved any interaction or confrontation between the Vice President and the Secret Service, of course, and the oncoming mob. So it was just incredibly heroic.
All right, Andrea, thank you. Let's go to Hallie Jackson right now. Hallie, again, putting into perspective of all this, your thoughts?
I'm struck by a couple of things, Lester. How many times has Joe Biden walked into this Capitol building over the course of his career, over the course of his many decades in public service? Thousands upon thousands of times, but never like this. And same goes for Vice President-elect Harris, for that matter as well, who served in this chamber. This is a moment for them, and it is a moment for the country to see as they walked up those stairs where 2 weeks ago, we all were live on the air here broadcasting the rioters breaching the steps. You notice who is attending today, somebody who's been speculated to potentially be involved in his impeachment trial. That means something, these individuals' attendance here. And while Joe Biden does come into office with many around the country, and frankly here in Washington, hoping for him to be able to make good on that promise of unification, he has some challenges ahead of him. Polling shows that most Americans, many Americans, are concerned about the uphill battle as it relates to unity, as it relates to progress. And the president-elect, we often talk about the first 100 days. He does not have that kind of luxury of time. This country is facing the crisis of public health and the pandemic, the economic crisis. He has two major bills, a $1.9 trillion economic relief bill and a massive immigration bill that will be sent to Congress today by the end of this week. And he is going to need cooperation from the spectrum of people that you see here on stage, from Senator Bernie Sanders, who we saw a shot of a few moments ago on the left, to Senator Ted Cruz, House Republicans on the right, to be able to get some of what he wants to do through Congress. He's going to do a lot in the next 3 days as far as executive orders, a federal mask mandate, for example. He's going to reverse a series of executive actions that President Trump took in his early days in office and throughout his 4 years. But executive orders can only get you so far. And I believe we're taking a look as we talk about the president's allies at Senator Lindsey Graham here, somebody else who has been with the president even in his final days of office, flying with him on Air Force One, for example, on the president's last trips here. Joe Biden is going to need that help to create the kind of change that he wants to create, to get done what he wants to get done, because those actions that he can take just via the power of the presidency only get him so far. As we look at what appears to be Steve Scalise, one of course, the Republican leaders walking through the halls of Congress here. I am also struck, as we take a moment to reflect here, this area that we've seen, and you saw a shot of what's called the crypt, where those big pillars are, packed with those insurrectionists just 2 weeks ago, chanting words like "hang Mike Pence," chanting about wanting to find lawmakers in their offices and bring them, in their words, to justice. It is such a different scene today. And I think it's powerful, and one of the reasons why you saw the Biden team push so hard to make sure that despite all the security measures in place in Washington, and this is my third inauguration, and I'll tell you, it looks very different than all the rest, at least from our perspective, he is able to stand on the West Front and do this. Typically, it's one of the things we get to do is spot people, talk about who we see. It's a lot harder to do when everyone's wearing masks, but that's another big change here. As I look out from the risers of the West Front, social distancing is in place for all of these chairs. Masks are virtually on every single person that I've seen so far. They are all but a requirement here. And that is a significant change to what we've seen. As you both know, typically you're packed like sardines here. It is another sign, as we saw last night with the president-elect's service there at the Lincoln Memorial, another sign that the backdrop to all this is not just the political disunity, the discord, the concern about where this country goes from that perspective. It's the pandemic, and that is the number one priority for President-elect Biden moving forward.
Allie Jackson, thank you.
Thank you so much. And we are joined by someone who has a unique perspective on these events, former Vice President Al Gore, who, of course, served in the Clinton administration, was the 2000 Democratic nominee for president. And we all know the rest of the story after there. Mr. Vice President, thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you for inviting me, Savannah. It's a happy day.
What are your thoughts as you see this ritual of democracy, not like any way we've seen it before because of the pandemic, because of what happened at the Capitol, but yet it goes on? What does it mean to you?
It means our republic lives, the center has held, democracy will return in full spirit. It means to me that when Joe Biden walks into the Oval Office not long from now, science will walk in with him. A reverence for truth will walk in with him. A commitment to seeking bipartisan solutions to our country's problems will walk in with him. Empathy will walk in with him. And I'm overcome with the hopefulness that this ceremony brings to us.
What is the significance of the absence of the outgoing president as part of this? Did Donald Trump, in some ways, do Joe Biden a favor by not being here?
Well, I had to chuckle just a little bit, Lester, when Joe Biden was asked about Trump's decision, and he said it was one of the few things he agreed with him on. You could argue it both ways. In some ways, it would be good for him to be there and uphold the traditions of our country. But under all the circumstances, it's just fine that he's not there.
Mr. Vice President, forgive me for getting personal. I know this is not your favorite subject, but we would be remiss if we didn't ask you what it was like. Because 20 years ago, where were you on this day? You were right there, having lost a hard, bitterly fought election, the recount, 534 votes, and you came. And in fact, I believe you presided over the January 6th certification of the electoral votes as the president of the Senate, since you were vice president then. What was that like for you in those moments? What was going through your mind?
Well, thank you for asking, Savannah. And the answer is actually pretty simple, because the importance of the United States of America in all of human history. In Lincoln's phrase, we still are the last best hope of humankind. And the choice between one's own disappointment in your personal career and upholding the noble traditions of America's democracy is a pretty easy choice when it comes down to it.
Mr. Vice President, we're not just facing a division in terms of political terms and policy terms. We're facing division from people who don't think this is going to be a legitimate presidency, who think that the country is somehow under an assault against freedom. That's a bigger hill to climb than any president has faced in trying to unify a country. How do you think, Joe Biden will go about it?
Well, I think, as others have said, Lester, he is the man for this moment. He is constituted in a way that leads him to reach out to others and build a bipartisan consensus wherever he can. This is hardly the first time, or the second or third or fourth or fifth time, when the side that lost an election feels bitterness and disappointment, but decides after reflection to put the nation first. And I hope very much that those who are still holding on to the lost cause of the outgoing president's reelection, which wasn't to be, will pause and reflect on what's far more important. And what's more important is the United States of America. And I do believe that with the passage of time, we are likely to see the kind of leadership Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are already beginning to provide will bring more toward the recognition that our people have chosen. And all just power is derived from the consent of the governed. The American people made this choice, and their choice is entitled to respect. I believe it will be given that respect in due time by the vast majority of Americans.
And a key question as you talk about how to go forward and whether the two sides can come together and find common ground, we can't ignore the fact that there's been an impeachment in the House, and the Senate will have to take up that matter and conduct a trial. And I wonder where you come down on it. Do you believe President Trump should be impeached by the Senate, and convicted?
Well, I listened with interest when Mitch McConnell spoke yesterday and indicated in effect that Donald Trump was responsible for the mob's assault on the Capitol. He said the mob was fed lies and provoked by the president. The mob was not the only group fed lies. One of the reasons why many of Donald Trump's supporters in the campaign still doubt the outcome of the freest and fairest election in our history is that they were fed lies as well. My faith tradition teaches me, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. The truth will eventually carry the day. Now, in the trial in the Senate, the evidence will decide the outcome. I don't mind telling you, if I were still in the Senate, I would vote to convict because I think accountability for this grave crime against the American Republic must be followed by accountability for those who instigated organized, provoked, and started it. And so we will see if enough Republican senators take the same approach that Mitch McConnell has signaled to listen to the evidence and make a considered judgment. I think that, well, we'll see what the outcome is, but I would not bet against conviction.
Former Vice President Al Gore, who on this day 20 years ago was right there in the midst, in the thick of the action. Thank you, sir, for your perspective. It's a unique one, and we're very grateful for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break right now, but we'll be back with much more of our Inauguration Day coverage as we await the swearing in of President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. We'll be right back.
All righty, we are on a break. So let's watch Donald Trump leave the White House for the last time. Some people are really not happy about today. Okay. Unfortunately, you're listening to your girl, Nicole Reloaded. We locked and loaded with another video. Please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe and all that good stuff for your girl. And if you don't thumbs up this video, Donald Trump is going to go right back in the White House.
Sometimes I say that I want you back, but I don't know if I do. Sometimes I think about the good days we had, but there were bad days too. And I know sometimes I say that I want you back, but I don't know if I do. Sometimes I think about the good days we had, but there were bad days too. And I know.
All right, congratulations to our President-elect Joe Biden. Now, what you have here on the screen is the officer that protected our hero, Officer Eugene Goodman, who led rioters away from Senate chambers during the insurrection at Capitol, will be escorting Kamala Harris to the inauguration as the new acting Deputy House Sergeant at Arms. Congratulations, Eugene. All right. Now that is awesome sauce right there. You go ahead, Eugene. You go ahead, Eugene. I'm proud of Eugene. Eugene was a bad mamma jamma. Okay, these are clips of them coming in. What is this right here? Okay, this is Joe Biden getting out the or is that Kamala getting out the motorcade? Let's see how it started, how it's going. Let's see what this brother said.
Such a big deal. Allow me to submit this. You can't be something unless you see something. See, imagine a world in where you walk outside and everything you see reflects you back to you. Now, imagine a world where it doesn't. When I was a kid, I wanted to play in the National Football League, the NFL, because there was a man by the name of Emmitt Smith, a Hall of Fame running back who was black. He looked like me, and so I said, wait, because I see him, I can be him. I chased that journey until I finally caught it. If you were to ask me as a kid, Emmanuel, what do you want to become when you grow up? To say president would have been an unrealistic expectation. So now imagine how many black and brown women, imagine how many black and brown people are empowered by Kamala Harris, a black woman, becoming vice president. Because remember, It's hard to be something if you don't see something.
All right, that was really good. Who is this brother? Why is Kamala Harris becoming vice president such a big deal, you ask? This is Emmanuel Echo. All right, with his handsome self. Ooh, I know they was like them stairs, child. Oh, Lord, look at this. Oh, God bless him. This was really beautiful. Stunning field of flags light up in National Mall ahead of Biden's inauguration. This is beautiful. Let's see. Okay, Ethan says on Twitter, the speed with which people are going to pretend the last 2 years didn't happen, weren't that bad, is going to be absolutely mind-numbing. Wow. Wow, they said it's the inauguration and Twitter is looking like the end of the world, huh? People are really upset. They said that Joe Biden's security is worried. Let me see. Okay, that was yesterday. Okay. With a little more than 90 minutes left, Trump issues a proclamation on aluminum imports. This one involves exports from the United Arab Emirates, Emirates, Emirates. A snippet from the proclamation. In light of this agreement, I have determined that the aluminum article imports from the United Arab Emirates will no longer threaten to impair the national security and have decided to exclude the United Arab Emirates from the tariff proclaimed in the proclamation 9704. Ooh, he doing stuff all at the last minute, y'all. Okay, what does this say? Facts. President-elect Joe Biden still has received less support from Republican leaders on the social media than Kyle Rittenhouse did. That's a that's a mega. Well, Donald Trump, I mean, he was a celebrity, like celebrity. So I'm not shocked that he's not getting the support that we would think that he would get. Breaking news, Azalea Blanks is currently performing. Are you serious? Is she performing at the inauguration? Is this a joke? I know darn well Azalea Banks. This got to be a joke. Breaking news, Azalea Banks is currently performing at... No, she is not. These people is crazy.
No, You know the vibes, whoopty. Oh, you know the vibes. I even know.
This is
you know
Joe
the
Biden.
vibes,
These people is crazy. Okay, former President George W. Bush and former First Lady Laura Bush arrived at the Capitol for inauguration for Joe Biden.
Mr. President, what does today mean to you?
He like, it's cold and I want to hurry up and go in the Capitol and get warm. That's what it means to me.
Mr. President, what does today mean to you?
Oh, there go Obama. Let me change the screens. Okay, Obama and Michelle Obama have arrived. Awesome sauce. You're listening to your girl Nicole Reloaded, and we're watching live updates to the inauguration. Oh, wait a minute. Did I share the wrong screen? I shared the wrong screen. Oops, and I closed it out. Oops, that was an accident. Bear with me. Thank you to all that is going to be watching on the replay. Make sure that you thumbs up this video, like, share, and subscribe. And your girl Nicole Reloaded is on Clubhouse. If you are there, please follow me at So Ready for Love.
The feeling of coming out and seeing the crowds that awaited. And this is a very different moment, as you pointed out. But when you think about just 2 weeks ago, people were storming our Capitol, trying to take over our government. And what does it say about our country that in such a short period of time, we see people show up, former presidents of both parties, leaders across the aisle, all to celebrate the smooth transition of power. And I think this is a moment made for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, soon to be President Biden and Vice President Harris. Their combined strength, their experience, their empathy and appreciation for what our country has gone through, and their core competency to lead and never forget that they were elected to serve, I think today sends them off to a really terrific start. So it's overwhelmingly emotional for me, having been there twice and having lived through the last really horrendous 4 years, but I feel very hopeful at this moment, Savannah.
Valerie, as we're watching members of the Supreme Court take their place, I want to ask you about your memories of that last day in the White House. We see the Obamas greeting the Trumps. It's a cordial moment. Was it a difficult moment for President Obama?
I think it was excruciating for us all. In fact, I posted on Instagram this morning a series of photographs that I took that day watching the flag ceremony where they gave to the Obamas the flag that flew the first day he was in office and then that last day, greeting then Vice President Biden and Dr. Biden for that last goodbye as they prior to leaving for the Capitol. And then their gracious embracing of the Trumps as they arrived into the White House. But I will tell you, it was painful and it was hard for everyone, saying goodbye to the folks who worked at the White House, who had been a part of their family for 8 years, and knowing that you're leaving with not the person that you would have wanted to succeed you, but you rise to the occasion. And that's what I saw President Obama and Michelle Obama do that day, and that's what we're seeing today. And when you interviewed former Vice President Gore earlier, he showed up, Hillary Clinton showed up after their election losses, and that's part of what the institution of the democracy depends upon. And so we have to look forward and not back, but I will say that it was a very, very hard day. And the test of your character is not how you behave when things go well, but how you behave when things don't go your way.
All right. Well, Valerie Jarrett, thank you for coming on with us today. We appreciate it.
And we're seeing more arrivals. If I had to guess, I'd say those were some Biden grandchildren and family members. And there's Hunter, right at the lead. And then you see behind him some of the grandchildren who we heard from a little earlier today. So we must be close then to be seeing the president-elect and the vice president-elect in just a few moments.
Yeah, they've been
about an hour now.
They've been in a holding room since arriving a short while ago at the Capitol. In case you missed it, they walked up the stairs on the east front of the Capitol and into the Capitol itself, symbolic, making a very powerful statement about reclaiming or defending this democracy.
We have to always keep that in mind. I always make comparisons. I said politics is much like WWE wrestling. We may tuggle with each other in the ring and have our battles, but when we get to the locker room and when the wrestling match is over, we tend to be able to come together and do things.
Let me just interrupt you and just.
We should just point out that
Yes, so the family members are coming in right now. We just saw Hunter Biden walk down the steps. Earlier, we saw some of the other sort of younger members of the Biden family. Not sure if Ashley Biden, his daughter, is sort of in that mix. It's hard to tell because everyone's wearing masks, which is a good thing. But no doubt, I'm sure, we may actually even see his grandchildren as well. We'll see. Sorry, didn't want to cut you off there, Antoine.
No, you're fine. The greater point is that we know the challenges that we face going forward, that Republicans are going to have to work with the White House, and this White House are going to have to work with Republicans if we want to solve the challenges of our day. Because by the time we wink, there will be an election cycle in the midterms that could change what the makeup of Washington looks like. And that's why I don't think you can take some of these policy differences too personal. And what everyone should see on display today is that regardless of your politics, we can sit behind our keyboards and our phones and tweet and post whatever we want. But the people who make decisions about our lives, they know how to get together. They know how to interact. They know how to work together when they choose to. And I think this is flirtation towards the idea that that can happen.
And I believe that's Mike Pence.
That is indeed.
Looks like Vice President Mike Pence is making his way. I just saw actually a note that says that Mike Pence left a letter for the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. As I understand it, President Trump also left a letter for President-elect Joe Biden. But, can we just talk, Antoine, about the importance of having Mike Pence here? He did not go to the president's send-off at Joint Base Andrews this morning, but he is making sure to be here for the inauguration of Mr. Biden.
Well, I think he's plugging his charger into a different source of power. He knows there will be life after Donald Trump in some way, shape, or form. And he knows there was life before Donald Trump, before him, and how certain elements of the Republican Party viewed him. So I think he's trying to represent the transition back to whatever the new norm will be for Republicans. And that's okay. It also sends a signal
I
to
hear
those.
you fine, but I'm not.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think. Technical difficulties, as always. Sorry
Here
for
we
the
are.
audience.
Party at Joint Base Andrews that President Trump had organized.
In speech after speech, Savannah, the vice president didn't just mention his boss, President Trump. He would go out of his way in very lavish terms to give him the credit for whatever the vice president was there to conduct the business of. That's the kind of relationship that they had, loyal every single step of the way until January 6th. And it began when the vice president was back here at the Capitol. He was here for that counting of the Electoral College vote. And throughout the hours that he was in a secure room, according to sources that I've talked to, President Trump did not once reach out to the vice president. And it sounds like he is several leaders getting introduced here at the west front of the Capitol. At no point did President Trump reach out. That angered the vice president. He spoke about that to some of his friends and colleagues about how after all of this, after all the loyalty, this is what happens as the president was then sending out angry tweets about the vice president. It is so significant that he is here today. He actually left a letter, we understand, from a White House official for Vice President-elect Kamala Harris at the White House. We know, of course, based on our team's reporting, that President Trump also left a note for President-elect Biden that, we're told, was left in the Oval Office by an aide at some point. So that is waiting, of course, for the president-elect when he arrives. And we're watching now this split-screen moment. I'm not sure if we have a shot of Air Force One arriving down in South Florida. That is where President Trump will call home for the foreseeable future. And down at Mar-a-Lago, you have about 100 of the president's supporters who have lined the route. As we see right now, this split screen, he is now going to be disembarking, getting off the plane for the last time as Air Force One, and he will be greeted by some of his supporters who have gathered for him there in Palm Beach. A very different scene than what we're seeing here at the west front of the Capitol, where there have been glimpses of bipartisanship. Congressman Jim Clyburn, for example, taking selfies with Congressman Steve Scalise. You had the Bushes walk immediately over to Clyburn, for example, congregate with them. Supreme Supreme Court justices, including Justice Sotomayor here, she, remember, will be the one who will be swearing in Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, a real moment of first, the first Latina Supreme Court justice, and of course the first woman of color to become the vice president. As we see the vice president and his wife now come out onto the balcony to a round of applause as I look behind me here. Everybody's standing and watching Vice President Mike Pence and Karen Pence as he assumes those traditional roles. He was here. He was the one delivering that speech in the moments after the insurrectionists took over at the Capitol. Once the all clear was given, it was Vice President Pence who came out and said democracy must prevail. It was Vice President Pence who returned to the Capitol to thank those National Guard troops that have moved in, not President Trump. It was the Vice President who over the last 4 days has been traveling, thanking the troops, and conducting the duties of the office. Savannah.
And Holly, that is the split screen that no one had exactly expected. Vice President Pence at the inauguration and the open door to Air Force One for the final departure of President Trump and the First Lady as they arrive in Florida.
56 minutes left in the term presidency, and it is remarkable. We talk about the transfer of power, and literally at 12 o'clock, 11:59, all the powers, all the weight, all the duties, nuclear codes, things that most of us don't have to think about on a daily basis, suddenly land in your lap.
But it's different in terms of logistics, because in every inauguration, except for 152 years ago, the outgoing president and the incoming president were there in the same place, and there was, in a way, a literal handoff. That won't take place here, but the business of government will continue, and arrangements have been made so that there will be continuity of government. And at the moment that the oath is sworn on the old Biden family Bible, in about an hour from now, we will have a new president. And perhaps as we look at this open door, President Trump has taken a long last look around and saying goodbye to some of the staff members who work on Air Force One and who certainly he's gotten to know over these last 4 years.
It's certainly a journey that Donald Trump has made many times aboard this plane or its twin plane between Washington and Florida, spending a lot of time at Mar-a-Lago. And there is President Trump. A rather elaborate send-off at Joint Base Andrews a few hours ago. We don't know what sort of greeting. We see the armored vehicle there right at the steps, so we don't, well, let's see what happens.
And yes, Melania Trump has changed into her Florida fashions for the occasion. She left Washington, and it's cold for the sunny skies of Florida, and has changed her wardrobe accordingly as they will drive off. But as you mentioned, 60 minutes and counting until we have a new president.
And what was it he said at the end of his remarks today? I'll be back in some form.
He said, I'll be back in some form. Absolutely. And definitely did not give any indication he plans to leave the political stage, but in what form that takes, we'll see. And now we see the Trump children descend the staircase. But this is the moment where the split screen goes away and all eyes go on the United States Capitol, because we are about to inaugurate a new president, and the seat of government and those who hold power in our government are ready. We've got 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices in attendance. The 3 oldest justices are not there because of pandemic concerns. We have congressional leaders, and we have about 1,000 guests, which is about a 20th of what normally would happen if there weren't a pandemic and these grave security concerns. But to our eyes, as you see the vice president there, it's all the trappings and all of the traditions that we would come to expect from an inauguration.
Kind of wondering what his political future he may be pondering. Again, kept a higher profile, we'll say, over the last couple of weeks as we have struggled with what happened at the Capitol.
His fortunes have changed quite a bit, and again, as mentioned, there was no greater loyal ally to President Trump than Mike Pence, but because supporters of the president were led to believe that there was anything that could be done to change the election, and Vice President Pence did not do that because he did not possess the power to do it. Quickly, that support became chants of hang Mike Pence inside the halls of that building 2 weeks ago. And yes, that's Alex Rodriguez. For those who are wondering, he's also Mr. J-Lo. Jennifer Lopez is going to be performing at this inauguration.
I heard him. I heard him interviewed somewhere yesterday talking about how nervous she is about. It's a tough venue.
Well, the Super Bowl is one thing, but this is indeed, and Lady Gaga is going to be performing the national anthem. So again, you can't help but enjoy eavesdropping, at least with your eyes, on what's taking place at the Capitol. Former presidents milling about with congressional leaders and A-list celebrities, and the Biden family has come in now. We've got 3 former presidents, 6 Supreme Court justices, and untold numbers of members of Congress as well.
Looking at President Obama, we're reminded, he kept his silence for much of the last 4 years, but down the stretch, he became a very powerful advocate and a powerful voice on behalf of Joe Biden.
That's Eugene Goodman, who has been given the honorary designation today of the acting deputy sergeant of arms. And if you're not familiar with his story, then we'll try to do it justice in these few moments we have. He's walking with Kamala Harris and Doug Emhoff, and he has that point of honor because he was on duty, Capitol Police officer, on that day, January 6th. And as the mob approached, a camera captured his quick thinking as he led the mob away from what he knew to be an open door right into the Senate chamber. And in doing so, could have perhaps prevented untold harm. And he has been commended for that action. And there's talk of a Congressional Medal of Honor for him. And today he has the honor of escorting Doug Emhoff and soon to be Vice President Kamala Harris.
So many images of that day, and so many of them horrifying, but that was certainly one of bravery and quick thinking and all the things that we would hope in a horrible situation like that. And so Kamala Harris, Doug Emhoff will make their way to the door and will be officially announced and presented as they take their place for the inauguration and swearing in.
And perhaps it's a measure of our times and how the news cycle and so much history being made as we speak that we haven't really paused, Lester, to note that we will have the first female vice president in our nation's history in an hour, and a first Black American vice president, first Indian American.
The chief of inaugural
So there will be all kinds of history made today.
The acting deputy House Sergeant at Arms, Kevin Grubbs, and the acting deputy Senate Sergeant at Arms, United States Capitol Police Officer, Private First Class Eugene O. Goodman.
And that earned a rousing applause.
Woo, the hero! He's a hero! He's a hero!
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President-elect of the United States, Kamala Devi Harris, and Mr. Douglas Emhoff.
Joe Biden is a tap of elbows there with President Obama and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris as she and her husband, Doug Emhoff, take up their position. It's worth noting that President-elect Biden has said he wants a relationship, a vice presidential relationship, not unlike the one he enjoyed with Barack Obama, in which he was always the last voice or the last person in the room at a time of grave and important decisions.
Well, you make a good point, because he is going to be president, but he's been vice president. So he knows all the highs and lows of that job. I mean, for a long time, it was always joked that it was the worst job in Washington, that there was really no prescribed duties, but it's become in the last few administrations quite important, quite momentous. We mentioned Joe Biden. You have to mention Dick Cheney under President Bush, a hugely influential vice president. So Kamala Harris certainly will have that opportunity, and just the magnitude of what needs to be done when you're talking about an economic travails that this country is in, the pandemic. There's so much work to be done. It's really a two-person job. So we'll see if they are able to forge that kind of functioning relationship.
A lot of pride will be felt as we noted, the first woman of color will take the oath. She will take the oath first, we should note. Momentarily, we expect the introduction of the president-elect and Dr. Jill Biden. Their family there, as you can see, enjoying the moment or trying to stay warm, or both. I'm going to assume they've got heaters up there on the platform.
Well, there's one good thing about masks. They do keep your face warm. So perhaps that's one plus that they otherwise.
Yeah, that's one giving another one.
I'll give you one, right? The other one is protection, of course. Yeah.
There is that.
Yes, protection from COVID. Let's bring in Chuck Todd and Andrea Mitchell, who are watching these images with us. And for all that has happened, at least these moments right now, Chuck, feel like the inaugurations that we've seen before, and that hallmark of American democracy that people in this country have come to count on?
I'll be honest, this has been an elixir of sorts, the last hour, just to see the normalcy of people in both parties participating in this. I mean, it's a necessary elixir, and I think it in many ways is why Joe Biden won the election. It was sort of this feeling that if anybody can create a moment, a unifying moment, it's him, that he has the right, he just has the right perspective. He's been through so much himself. It gives him the right level of empathy the country is desperately looking for here. And I'll just be honest. This is just, it's nice to hear the patriotic music. I mean, we took some of this for granted until 2 weeks ago. I'll be honest. And so I have looked at all of this through a different set of eyes since January 6th today.
Absolutely.
Andrea.
Yeah, I covered Congress for many years, and I've been up on that podium, and seeing this restores a sense that we're okay. We're going to be okay. The country's going to be okay. It's just extraordinary to see all of these leaders who've worked together. Now you have Mitch McConnell and others coming out. There is a bipartisan note. I saw a note earlier from Marco Rubio that the reason he is not here, and there you see the Bidens, Savannah, coming through. But Marco Rubio just quickly is saying that he's not here only because he is rushing to confirm Avril Haines, who had her confirmation hearing yesterday, and overcome any Republican objections. Savannah?
As we watch the president-elect, soon-to-be president, and soon-to-be first lady approach, and we saw the congressional leaders, I do think, Chuck, to pick up on what you were talking about, there is that almost feeling of defiance, institutional defiance. Congress saying, wait a minute, you attacked us 2 weeks ago, but just as they came in the late hours of the night and completed their business on January 6th, this is a continuation of that thread, their constitutional duty to inaugurate a new president at high noon, January 20th, that is written in our founding documents, and in 45 minutes it will happen. And there does feel like there's that defiance and determination on the part of Republicans and Democrats.
I want to share with you, Savannah, I want to pick up on this. I want to share with you, I talked to somebody who was pretty high up in the Bush administration a couple of weeks ago, who said, I know you guys in the press are beating yourselves up, members of Congress are. He says, you know what? The guardrails did work over these last 4 years. They got bruised, they got beaten, and we've seen, but we're in some ways, and almost today itself is a reminder, as much as we thought, oh my God, look how vulnerable our system is to sort of crumbling. A lot of the institutions, while they were battered and bruised, whether it's ours in the press or Congress or other institutions, they worked, they held up. And And this person said to me, you know what? I don't want to share his name because it would just give that person a lot of problems. But he sort of said, you know what? In 20 years, we may look back at this in the same way we look back at the McCarthy years and say, you know what? The system worked. We weeded it out. And this morning, right now, as a reminder, our guardrails did hold up.
Acting Senate Sergeant at Arms, Jennifer.
The weather may be a different story. We're seeing a few little snow flurries out there, and we're starting to see some of the introductions, more congressional leaders coming in. I'm squinting at the screen to see who we can identify, but any moment now that we know that President-elect Biden and soon-to-be First Lady Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, are on the move inside the Capitol and about to make their big entrance.
And we're going to hear remarks shortly from Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri on behalf of the Inauguration Committee.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. and Dr. Jill Biden. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Please welcome the Honorable Amy Klobuchar.
Vice President Pence, President-elect, Madam Vice President-elect, members of Congress and the judicial branch, former presidents and first ladies, vice presidents, leaders from abroad, and a whole bunch of Bidens. America, welcome to the 59th presidential inauguration, where in just a few moments, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will take their solemn oaths. This ceremony is the culmination of 244 years of a democracy. It is the moment when leaders brought to this stage by the will of the people promise to be faithful to our Constitution, to cherish it and defend it. It is the moment when they become, as we all should be, guardians of our country. Have we become too jaded, too accustomed to the ritual of the passing of the torch of democracy to truly appreciate what a blessing and a privilege it is to witness this moment? I think not. 2 weeks ago, when an angry, violent mob staged an insurrection and desecrated this temple of our democracy, it awakened us to our responsibilities as Americans. This is the day when our democracy picks itself up, brushes off the dust, and does what America always does, goes forward as a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This conveyance of a sacred trust between our leaders and our people takes place in front of this shining Capitol dome for a reason. When Abraham Lincoln gave his first inaugural address in front of this Capitol, the dome was only partially constructed, braced by ropes of steel. He promised he would finish it. He was criticized for spending funds on it during the Civil War. To those critics, he replied, "If the people see the Capitol going on, it is a sign we intend the Union shall go on." And it did, and it will. Generations of Americans gave their lives to preserve our republic in this place. Great legislation to protect civil rights and economic security and lead the world was debated and crafted under this dome. Now it falls on all of us, not just the two leaders we are inaugurating today, to take up the torch of our democracy, not as a weapon of political arson, but as an instrument for good. We pledge today never to take our democracy for granted as we celebrate its remarkable strength. We celebrate its resilience, its grit. We celebrate the ordinary people doing extraordinary things for our nation, the doctors and nurses on the front line of this pandemic, the officers in the Capitol, a new generation never giving up hope for justice. We celebrate a new president, Joe Biden, who vows to restore the soul of America and cross the river of our divides to a higher plane. And we celebrate our first African American, first Asian American, and first woman vice president, Kamala Harris, who stands on the shoulders of so many on this platform who have forged the way to this day. When she takes the oath of office, little girls and boys across the world will know that anything and everything is possible. And in the end, that is America, our democracy, a country of so much good. And today, on these Capitol steps and before this glorious field of flags, we rededicate ourselves to its cause. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce to you the senator who has worked with me and so many others to make this ceremony possible, my friend and the chair of the inaugural committee, Missouri Senator Roy Blunt.
Well, I should have known when Senator Klobuchar got involved, at least there'd be a touch of snow up here this morning. Of all the things we'd considered, I don't think snow was on my agenda until I walked out the door a moment ago. But thank you, Senator Klobuchar, and thanks to the other members of the Joint Congressional Committee on the Inauguration as we officially begin the 59th inaugural ceremony. I also want to thank the Joint Committee staff and our partners, particularly our security partners, for the way they've dealt with unprecedented circumstances. When I chaired the inauguration 4 years ago, I shared President Reagan's 1981 description of this event as commonplace and miraculous. Commonplace because we've done it every 4 years since 1789. Miraculous because we've done it every 4 years since 1789. Americans have celebrated this moment during war, during depression, and now during pandemic. Once again, all three branches of our government come together as the Constitution envisions. Once again, we renew our commitment to our determined democracy, forging a more perfect union. That theme for this inauguration, our determined democracy, forging a more perfect union, was announced by the Joint Committee before the election with the belief that the United States can only fulfill its promise and set an example for others if we are always working to be better than we have been. The Constitution established that determined democracy with its first three words, declaring the people as the source of the government. The Articles of Confederation hadn't done that. The Magna Carta hadn't done that. Only the Constitution says the government exists because the people are the source of the reason it exists. They immediately followed those first three words with the words to form a more perfect union. The founders did not say to form a perfect union. They did not claim that in our new country nothing would need to be improved. Fortunately, they understood that always working to be better would be the hallmark of a great democracy. The freedoms we have today, the nation we have today, is not here just because it happened, and they aren't complete. A great democracy working through the successes and failures of our history, striving to be better than it had been. And we are more than we have been, and we are less than we hope to be. The assault on our Capitol at this very place just 2 weeks ago reminds us that a government designed to balance and check itself is both fragile and resilient. During the last year, the pandemic challenged our free and open society and called for extraordinary determination and sacrifice, and still challenges us today. Meeting that challenge head on have been and are healthcare workers, scientists, first responders, essential frontline workers, and so many others we depend on in so many ways. Today we come to this moment. People all over the world, as we're here, are watching and will watch what we do here. Our government comes together. The Congress and the courts join the transition of executive responsibility. One political party more pleased today and on every inaugural day than the other. But this is not a moment of division, it's a moment of unification. A new administration begins and brings with it a new beginning. And with that, our great national debate goes forward, and a determined democracy will continue to be essential in pursuit of a more perfect union and a better future for all Americans. What a privilege for me to join you today. Thank you. I'm pleased to call to the podium a longtime friend of the president-elect and his family, Father Leo O'Donovan, to lead us in an invocation. Please stand if you are able and remain standing for the national anthem and the pledge to our flag. Thank you, Senator. I'll have to step for me. Thank you.
Gracious and merciful God, at this sacred time we come before you in need, indeed on our knees. But we come still more with hope and with our eyes raised anew to the vision of a more perfect union in our land, a union of all our citizens to promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We are a people of many races, creeds, and colors, national backgrounds, cultures, and styles, now far more numerous and on land much vaster than when Archbishop John Carroll wrote his prayer for the inauguration of George Washington 232 years ago. Archbishop Carroll prayed that you, O Creator of all, would assist with your Holy Spirit of counsel and fortitude the President of these United States, that his administration may be conducted in righteousness and be eminently useful to your people. Today we confess our past failures to live according to our vision of equality, inclusion, and freedom for all. Yet we resolutely commit still more now to renewing the vision, to caring for one another in word and deed, especially the least fortunate among us, and so becoming a light for the world. There is a power in each and every one of us that lives by turning to every other one of us, a thrust of the Spirit to cherish and care and stand by others, and above all, those most in need. It is called love, and its path is to give ever more of itself. Today, it is called American patriotism, born not of power and privilege, but of care for the common good, with malice toward none and with charity for all. For our new president, we beg of you the wisdom Solomon sought when he knelt before you and prayed for an understanding heart, so that I can govern your people and know the difference between right and wrong. We trust in the counsel of the letter of James. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Pope Francis has reminded us how important it is to dream together. By ourselves, he wrote, we risk seeing mirages, things that are not there. Dreams, on the other hand, are built together. Be with us, holy mystery of love, as we dream together. Help us under our new president to reconcile the people of our land, restore our dream and invest it with peace and justice and the joy that is the overflow of love. To the glory of your name, forever, amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the presentation of our national colors by the Armed Forces Color Guard, the singing of our national anthem, and for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ladies and gentlemen, here for the singing of our national anthem, accompanied by the President's own United States Marine Band, please welcome Lady Gaga.
whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. For the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Sing us that star-spangled banner yet wave on the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from the city of South Fulton, Georgia Fire and Rescue Department, President of the International Association of Firefighters, Local 3920, Fire Captain Andrea M. Hall, for the reciting of the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
What you are all about to be part of, America, is a historic moment of firsts. To administer the oath to our first African American, our first Asian American, and our first woman vice president, Kamala Harris, it is my great privilege to welcome to the inaugural stage the first Latina to ever serve on the Supreme Court of the United States of America, Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the oath of office, followed by musical honors.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I take this obligation freely,
that I take this obligation freely,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
that I will well and faithfully discharge
that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
the duties of the office upon which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Oh, she's crying. Oh, yay. Hopefully America is happy today. Hopefully America is happy. God, you better touch that woman's heart in the name of Yahshua HaMashiach, Lord Jesus. That is the first African-American woman. She better do right. Redeem yourself, Kamala.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Please welcome Jennifer Lopez to perform This Land Is Your Land and America the Beautiful, accompanied by members of the President's Own United States Marine Band.
This land was made for you and me. Oh, this land, this land was made for you and me. You and me. Oh, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood. From sea to shining sea. Una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos. Let's get loud. This land was made for you and me.
Well, that was great. The sun is shining, and Mr. President-elect, this is the first inauguration in the history of America where J-Lo was the warm-up act for Chief Justice Roberts. With that, it is now my distinct honor to introduce the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, John Roberts, to administer the presidential oath to the next President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the oath of office, followed by musical honors.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
Office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
My fellow Americans, a moment we have all been waiting for. It is now my great privilege and high honor to be the first person to officially introduce the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
Chief Justice Roberts, Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell, Vice President Pence, and my distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. This is America's day. This is democracy's day, a day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious, democracy is fragile, and at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. So now, on this hallowed ground where just a few days ago, violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundation, we come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, to carry out the peaceful transfer of power as we have for more than 2 centuries. As we look ahead in our uniquely American way, restless, bold, optimistic, and set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. I thank my predecessors of both parties for their presence here today. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. And I know the resilience of our Constitution and the strength of our nation, as does President Carter, who I spoke with last night, who cannot be with us today, but whom we salute for his lifetime in service. I've just taken the sacred oath each of those patriots have taken, the oath first sworn by George Washington. But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us, on we, the people, who seek a more perfect union. This is a great nation. We are good people. And over the centuries, through storm and strife, in peace and in war, we've come so far, but we still have far to go. We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once-in-a-century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself. A cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history It'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it. My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. Uniting to fight the foes we face: anger, resentment and hatred, extremism, lawlessness, violence, disease, joblessness, and hopelessness. With unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make healthcare secure for all. We can deliver racial justice, and we can make America once again the leading force for good in the world. I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all are created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial, and victory is never assured. Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us have come together to carry all of us forward. And we can do that now. History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge, and unity is the path forward. And we must meet this moment as the United States of America. If we do that, I guarantee you we will not fail. We have never, ever, ever, ever failed in America. We've acted together. And so today, at this time, in this place, let's start afresh, all of us. Let's begin to listen to one another again, hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. And we must reject the culture in which facts themselves are manipulated and even manufactured. My fellow Americans, we have to be different than this. America has to be better than this. And I believe America is so much better than this. Just look around. Here we stand in the shadow of the Capitol Dome, as was mentioned earlier, completed amid the Civil War, when the Union itself was literally hanging in the balance. Yet we endured. We prevailed. Here we stand, looking out on the great mall where Dr. King spoke of his dream. Here we stand where 108 years ago, at another inaugural, thousands of protesters tried to block brave women marching for the right to vote. And today, we mark the swearing in of the first woman in American history elected to national office, Vice President Kamala Harris. Don't tell me things can't change. Here we stand across the Potomac from Arlington Cemetery, where heroes who gave the last full measure of devotion rest in eternal peace. And here we stand, just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy, to drive us from this sacred ground. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever. To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you've placed in us. To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. If you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I pledge this to you. I will be a president for all Americans. All Americans. And I promise you, I will fight as hard for those who did not support me as for those who did. Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies. Look, I understand that many of my fellow Americans view the future with fear and trepidation. I understand they worry about their jobs. I understand, like my dad, they lay in bed staring at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering, can I keep my health care? Can I pay my mortgage? Thinking about their families, about what comes next. I promise you, I get it. But the answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you, or worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same sources you do. We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts, if we show a little tolerance and humility, and if we're willing to stand in the other person's shoes, as my mom would say, just for a moment, stand in their shoes. Because here's the thing about life. There's no accounting for what fate will deal you. Some days, when you need a hand. There are other days when we're called to lend a hand. That's how it has to be. That's what we do for one another. And if we are this way, our country will be stronger, more prosperous, more ready for the future. And we can still disagree. My fellow Americans, in the work ahead of us, we're going to need each other. We need all our strength to persevere through this dark winter. We're entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period of the virus. We must set aside politics and finally face this pandemic as one nation. One nation. And I promise you this, as the Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We will get through this together. Together. Look, folks, all my colleagues I serve with in the House and the Senate up here, we all understand the world is watching all of us today. So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. We'll be a strong and trusted partner for peace, progress, and security. Look, you all know we've been through so much in this nation. And in my first act as president, I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silent prayer. Remember all those who we lost in this past year to the pandemic, those 400,000 fellow Americans, moms, dads, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. We'll honor them for becoming the people and the nation we know we can and should be. So I ask you, let's say a silent prayer for those who've lost their lives and those left behind, and for our country. Amen. Folks, this is a time of testing. We face an attack on our democracy and on truth, a raging virus, growing inequity, the sting of systemic racism, a climate in crisis, America's role in the world. Any one of these would be enough to challenge us in profound ways. But the fact is, we face them all at once, presenting this nation with one of the gravest responsibilities we've had. Now we're going to be tested. Are we going to step up, all of us? It's time for boldness, for there's so much to do. And this is certain. I promise you, we will be judged, you and I, by how we resolve these cascading crises of our era. We will rise to the occasion is the question. Will we master this rare and difficult hour? Will we meet our obligations and pass along a new and better world to our children? I believe we must. I'm sure you do as well. I believe we will. And when we do, we'll write the next great chapter in the history of the United States of America, the American story. A story that might sound something like a song that means a lot to me. It's called American Anthem. There's one verse that stands out, at least for me, and it goes like this. The work and prayers of century have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? Let me know in my heart when my days are through. America, America, I gave my best to you. Let's us add our own work and prayers to the unfolding story of our great nation. If we do this, then when our days are through, our children and our children's children will say of us, they gave their best, they did their duty, they healed a broken land. My fellow Americans, I close the day where I began, with the sacred oath. Before God and all of you, I give you my word. I will always level with you. I will defend the Constitution. I'll defend our democracy. I'll defend America. And I'll give all of you, keep everything I do in your service, thinking not of power, but of possibilities, not of personal interest, but the public good. And together we shall write an American story of hope, not fear, of unity, not division, of light, not darkness, a story of decency and dignity, love and healing, greatness and goodness. May this be the story that guides us, the story that inspires us, and the story that tells ages yet to come that we answered the call of history. We met the moment. Democracy and hope, truth and justice did not die on our watch, but thrived. That America secured liberty at home and stood once again as a beacon to the world. That is what we owe our forebears, one another, and generation to follow. So, with purpose and resolve, we turn to those tasks of our time, sustained by faith, driven by conviction, and devoted to one another and the country we love with all our hearts. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, America.
Joseph Robinette Biden has been sworn in and assumed the office of the presidency, the 46th president of the United States, the oldest man ever to assume the presidency at 78 years old, delivering a speech on themes of unity, of hope, of rewriting an American history, the new chapter in American history, saying it is time for Americans to come together in common cause.
He says we must end this uncivil war. He noted that democracy has prevailed, noting the attack on the Capitol 2 weeks ago. He says there's been an attack on democracy and the truth. Garth Brooks now will perform.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. If I can ask you to sing this last verse with me, not just the people here, but the people at home, at work, as one, united. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Amen. Garth Brooks performing for the crowd there over the on the west front of the Capitol, where moments ago we heard the inauguration speech by President Biden. We'll get used to saying that now. President
It's
Biden.
a new era and a new day in Washington as the Constitution decreed at 12 noon the term of the prior president ends and the prior vice president, and there is a new president and vice president, President Biden and Vice President Harris.
Not to be reminded of President Obama's
Let's
singing
listen.
that same song at the Mother Emanuel Church. A song that in our culture is as close to both poetry and prayer as you could possibly come. And we're going to finish with those two things. Let me introduce Amanda Gorman, our nation's first ever National Poet Laureate.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is hours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens, but one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the wind-swept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Her name is Amanda Gorman. She is 22 years old, from Los Angeles. What a just powerful, beautiful piece of poetry she just delivered.
Well, you'd hate to follow her.
Yeah.
She did, we had prose and now we've had poetry and we've had song.
Now for our benediction, I'm pleased to introduce Reverend Dr. Sylvester Beeman, the pastor of the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Wilmington, Delaware, a friend of President Biden for 30 years.
As a nation and people of faith gathered in this historical moment, let us unite in prayer. God, we gather under the beauty of your holiness and the holiness of your beauty. We seek your face, your smile, your warm embrace. We petition you once more in this celebration. We pray for divine favor upon our president, Joseph R. Biden, and our First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, and their family. We further ask that you would extend the same favor upon our Vice President, Kamala D. Harris, and our second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, and their family. More than ever, they and our nation need you. We need you, for in you we discover our common humanity. In our common humanity, we will seek out the wounded and bind their wounds. We will seek healing for those who are sick and diseased. We will mourn our dead. We will befriend the lonely, the least, and the left out. We will share our abundance with those who are hungry. We will do justly to the oppressed, acknowledge sin, and seek forgiveness, thus grasping reconciliation. In discovering our humanity, we will seek the good in and for all our neighbors. We will love the unlovable, remove the stigma of the so-called untouchables. We will care for our most vulnerable, our children, the elderly, emotionally challenged, and the poor. We will seek rehabilitation beyond correction. We will extend opportunity to those locked out of opportunity. We will make friends of our enemies. We will make friends of our enemies. People, your people, shall no longer raise up weapons against one another. We will rather use our resources for the national good and become a beacon of life and goodwill to the world. And neither shall we learn hatred anymore. We will lie down in peace and not make our neighbors afraid. In you, O God, we discover our humanity. In our humanity, we discover our commonness. Beyond the difference of color, creed, origin, political party, ideology, geography, and personal preferences, we'll become greater stewards of your environment, preserving the land, reaping from it a sustainable harvest, and securing its wonder and miracle-giving power for generations to come. This is our benediction, that from these hallowed grounds, where slaves labored to build this shrine and citadel to liberty and democracy, let us all acknowledge, from the indigenous Native American to those who recently received their citizenship, from the African American to those whose foreparents came from Europe and every corner of the globe, from the wealthy to those struggling to make it, from every human being, regardless of their choices, that this is our country. As such, teach us, O God. As such, teach us, O God, to live in it, love in it, be healed in it, and reconcile to one another in it, lest we miss kingdom's goal. To your glory, majesty, dominion, and power forever. Hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. In the strong name of our collective faith. Amen.
Please remain standing as the Armed Forces Color Guard retires our national colors.
And that concludes the inauguration ceremony at the Capitol. It looked different than any other, and as we expected, the empty spaces, the social distancing. What we didn't see, except in a few cutaways, I suppose, was the soldiers, that ring of steel around this general area, owing to what happened 2 weeks ago. I want to bring in NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. Michael, give me your first and early reaction to the inauguration speech.
Please be seated.
Terrific speech, and I think Lester will be known for 3 words. Democracy has prevailed. The new president is talking about the last 4 years as a period where there were attacks on democracy, attacks on truth, attacks on humanity, looking at sort of a 4-year aberration from the general course of American history. I thought the speech was modest, austere, brave, cleansing, calming, and inspirational. And that's what you'd want to get. In contrast to Donald Trump 4 years ago, who was talking about American carnage with groups pitted against group, Joe Biden was talking today about a country that needs to be united and also needs to mourn more than 400,000 Americans who have died of the terrible virus, more than died in the military in World War II.
And Michael, there's no question that the president is looking to turn the page, saying we must end this uncivil war. And on the steps of the Capitol, and with allusions to Abraham Lincoln, that is not a throwaway line, especially when you think about what happened 2 weeks ago when there was an insurrection attempted at the United States Capitol to subvert democracy itself. As you mentioned, he said, this is America's day. This is democracy's day, and democracy has prevailed. He clearly feels that, above all, unity is the business and the mission of this presidency.
You were so right, Savannah. And he's saying something, with all these inaugurations, every new president lost democracy and the peaceful transfer of power so much that we take it for granted. President Biden, 2 weeks after the attack on the Capitol and the Congress of January 6th, is speaking to us at a moment in which we have just had a very close call. Under a few scenarios, we might have lost our democracy. What might we be talking today? And at the same time, he recognizes that he has to deal with more crises at once than almost any president in American history. Pandemic, the economic crisis, people are starving and out of jobs, a crisis of racial justice that's gone on for 400 years with systemic racism, a crisis of climate change, and others. These are not things that he could just afford to say, maybe I'll do that after the midterm election, or maybe I'll do it if I'm reelected to a second term. He knows he has to do all these things right now. Very tough for a new president.
The new president and new first lady making their way now from the platform. We'll see them again a bit later at the laying at the wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington National Cemetery. Let me bring in Mike Barnacle into our conversation, a veteran journalist and NBC News contributor, also a long-time family friend of the Bidens. Michael, he spoke of unity as we thought. He acknowledged that some may see it as words. What are the deeds that will have to follow to fully deliver this message?
Well, I think the deeds are obvious to all. Lester, he's got to attack the virus with a vaccine, apply it to hundreds of millions of Americans in order to get the rest of the ball rolling and get the job done. The speech itself, I thought, though, had elements, deeply personal elements. At one point, the president said, "There's no accounting for what fate will do to you." And God knows that's true for Joe Biden. He's carried his own cross for 50 years of loss and suffering, but also of resilience. And his very presence on the stage today was a form of resilience in full flower. We saw him as President of the United States, and he spoke to elements of his character, his own personality, that he thinks should apply to the United States of America. Elements of humility, tolerance, generosity, and optimism. And as Savannah just mentioned, he said, we've got to end this uncivil war. That's in his nature to do that. The speech, while personal, it was also political, and it was about joining together as a country and reestablishing a component part of truth in government, truth in the Oval Office, something that's been sorely missing for 4 years.
I thought it was interesting, Mike, as well. It was very much a Joe Biden speech, and he spoke and addressed those who aren't his supporters and said,
the country has to do to get forward. So a huge contrast, to say the least, to that line, American carnage, that we heard on those same steps 4 years ago.
Absolutely. And Ken, it's something that Caitlin brought up, this point that President Biden brought up about facts and agreeing on a set of facts, which is something also that President Obama has mentioned before, too, that we live in a time when we can't all seem to agree on the facts. What does the president see as the biggest challenge in getting all Americans on the same page, as it were?
Well, obviously, it has to come first to the greatest crisis we are facing at the moment, which still remains the pandemic and this virus, and the fact that because we have been so poorly led through most of the past year on this issue. That's the first fact that has to be dealt with, how we can fight back against this virus. We had been led by a man who rejected science, ignored science, rejected the decency of prioritizing the public health over other issues, and used lies and propaganda, quite frankly. This is not meant to be a discussion of the former president. I think we should be celebrating this moment. But it's a perfect example of how dangerous the misuse of misinformation, disinformation, lies, and propaganda can be. And the President Biden will have a big job for him, not only when it comes to that sense of accurate information, but a whole range of other things that we've been arguing about for a long time. So it is a dangerous moment. As the president said, we know that democracy is fragile. He said that in his speech. Many of us have taken for granted for a very long time that democracy was forever. We know that democracy can disappear. It can disappear overnight, as it did in Germany and in Italy under Mussolini and Hitler. So this is not something to be taken lightly. And this is a moment when democracy is under enormous stress. And so I think that that basic fact also has to be addressed. And certainly as we go forward in the very near future, we're going to have to address the facts of what happened 2 weeks ago. That's going to be central to anything going forward. And most likely that will include a second impeachment trial, unprecedented in our history.
Yes, it's crucial that we reconcile with that to move forward in healing as a nation. I believe we have Bishop T.D. Jakes with us as well. Bishop, if you are there, can you please give us your thoughts after listening to President Biden's inaugural speech?
I'm overwhelmed. I have so many thoughts about what we've heard and what we've witnessed, particularly painted on the canvas of what we've seen in this past week and over this past year and 4 years. I think that the inaugural speech really spoke to contextualizing this present crisis that we find ourselves in as a nation, and contextualized it with the historical data of what Abraham Lincoln faced, the Emancipation Proclamation. It was striking to me that he invoked memories of the hard-fought battle for women's rights to vote and the tumultuous times through which we've gone through, and the end result of now Vice President Kamala Harris ascending into a position that could not have been dreamed of. It was hopeful. It was encouraging. It was conciliatory. His way in which he finessed handling Vice President Pence being there and acknowledged him and with such warmth and integrity spoke to a dignity and a class that I think America is hungry to see from our leadership right now.
You know, it's interesting looking back at some of the famous inauguration quotes from past inauguration speeches. There is so much that President Biden drew from, as you mentioned, the better angels of Abraham Lincoln's speeches. You know, the call to action that we heard John F. Kennedy say, and so my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. A fearlessness facing the future that we heard from, you know, Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1933, arguably another very dark time in American history. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I believe earlier we mentioned Gerald Ford's 1974 inauguration speech, where he said our long national nightmare is over. Sort of a compilation of all of these could be heard in President Biden's words. Caitlin, looking ahead, this is a moment of unity. This is a moment of the country coming together. But we know that there is an impeachment trial looming. We know that there is a virus that has killed 400,000 Americans. We know that there is an economy that is struggling to get back on its feet. So what is the immediate task at hand?
That's right. This is a president who comes into office facing not hypothetical challenges, but very real ones. And he addressed these head on, speaking about the pandemic, speaking about the economy, speaking about our political divisions, and this need to come together to be able to get through it. Most immediate is this idea of legislation to address a relief for those who have suffered economically from the coronavirus pandemic. That is front and center of this agenda, in addition to other big items. But I kind of want to take a moment and just think of the symbolism of what we saw just now. I mean, just to reiterate, 2 weeks ago, we saw that riot on those same steps, trying to prevent the very thing that happened today, the peaceful transition of power, the acknowledgement that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won the election and are now the president and vice president. We saw 2 weeks ago a ginormous stress test to the fundamentals of our democracy. And that's also something that the president, now President Biden, addressed in his speech. He said, America has been tested and we have come out stronger for it. So this speech today seemed to be an effort to reclaim those capital steps and that moment and that visual and to try to move the country forward. It's a daunting task. Yes, we saw Republican lawmakers there today with Democratic lawmakers, but we know that the country remains divided, and so does our government in lots of ways, even though Democrats now have a narrow control. Biden is going to have to convince Republicans to cross the aisle on several of these big items to get these big things done. And that's why we saw this overture from him today, to try to bring the country together, to speak to those who didn't vote for him as well as those who did.
And Bishop Jakes, our nation, of course, is dealing with so much, from COVID-19 and unemployment to the political chaos we just heard Caitlin describe, that violent insurrection just 2 weeks ago at this very same spot. We've been discussing how hopeful President Biden's message is, but is it realistically enough for the nation to begin the healing process?
I think it's naive to think that the message itself will be the cure that we need against the virus of malice and hatred, much less the physical virus that we are fighting today. It would be naive to think that one ceremony or service would eradicate the years and years of historical complexities that make up this great country that we live in today. However, it does set a tone. And from our leadership, we get a tone to which gradually we hope that it will reproduce itself in the behavior and the character of our country. I think how we proceed from here will require both Republicans and Democrats to come together in a concerted effort, understanding, as Dr. King would have phrased it, the fierce urgency of now. Demands that we put on.
Bishop, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to point out, you were speaking of tone, and I just want to point out what we are seeing is definitely, setting the stage of a bipartisan tone. We are seeing former Vice President Pence and his wife leaving the Capitol. They were bid farewell from the current Vice President Kamala Harris and her husband. This is an important and symbolic moment because, as we know, President Trump did not attend the inauguration. He's the most important member of the Trump administration to be here today. This is an important visual moment. It's a visual of the peaceful transition of power, which means so much in this country. And Bishop, sorry to interrupt what you were saying, but I just wanted to reiterate that your words were playing out on screen what we are seeing. Go ahead.
Well, that is a prime example of what I mean by leadership. The ability to disagree and still have dignity and still have appropriateness is something that we teach our children, and certainly want to see that in our leaders. And that's what makes us hopeful that this sets a new tone for a different type of discourse. We will always have that discourse. We will always have that debate. That's what makes America great. And we need that debate in order to bring our best selves to the forefront. What has happened in recent times is that the fringes of hatred that have always existed have been called center stage. And what I call this is not to eradicate that hate, but to remove it to the outer fringes where it does not have the center stage, the microphone of this nation, the attention of the press, the voice that it currently has had over the past, I don't know how long. It's always been there. We always knew it was there. Prejudice and injustice and so many other things that plague our society have always been there. And perhaps in the fact that it came center stage for a while, it lost its anonymity and our ability to deny its existence. We can no longer be naive and say that does not exist in this country. It absolutely does, and it exists in every facet of our society. The very fact that we had to purge some of the guards because of their alliances perpetuates an idea that has been hard to convince America, from police officers to elected officials. In every aspect of human life, these ideologies exist, but they cannot rule and they cannot reign. And we must push extremists to the outer perimeters of the face of America and put it in its rightful place by allowing all of us, the right and the left, to condemn hate and malice and violence and the types of things that we have seen center stage and almost applauded in recent days.
And Kenneth, if you are still with us, if you could speak to the significance of the fact that President Trump is not here today. It has been a very, very long time since an outgoing U.S. president has not attended the inauguration of his successor. Can you give us some color around that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because we've been speaking about Lincoln, and it was Lincoln's successor after his assassination, Andrew Johnson, who was the last president not to attend his successor's inauguration. Andrew Johnson, generally considered one of the worst presidents in American history. Also, another impeached president, so another connection to the former president. You know, I want to turn briefly, though, to I think that Bishop Jakes has been so wonderful, to the sense of renewal. I think that a lot of people, if they feel like me, felt as we were going through this day. We're talking about a lot of problems. The president mentioned the winter of peril, but what an extraordinary moment in our history, and we just got a glimpse of it there as the Speaker of the House, a woman, Nancy Pelosi, was speaking to the Vice President of the United States, a woman, Kamala Harris, a Black Asian woman. What an extraordinary moment. That was impossible to imagine not that long ago, I believe, and certainly not possible for Abraham Lincoln to imagine in 1861 when he talked about the better angels of our nature. He also said at that time, and that's why I think that history drapes this whole event today, he talked about the mystic chords of memory. And I think that's what we've tried to focus on today in looking at this speech. This has been a speech and an event that really talks about those chords of memory stretching back over patriot graves to George Washington and the Revolution and the Civil War and the great, great losses that we've come through over more than 200 years. But we are at a remarkable new moment in our history. Joy cometh in the morning, as the president reminded us. And I think in spite of all the difficulties that we face, I got chills all morning myself, listening to these speeches, hearing some of these people, just seeing them. The visuals were extremely powerful today, especially again when set up against what we saw just 2 weeks ago. So I think that the fact that the former president was not mentioned, certainly the predecessors who were there were prominent. They will go later on to Arlington. Again, stretching back across those mystic chords, Arlington Cemetery, born out of property taken from Robert E. Lee. So all of this history always comes together in these moments. So I do think it's a remarkable moment when we can think about the dignity and decorum and decency that I think overwhelmed this moment today, at least for me as an observer.
Absolutely. I think for most Americans observing the events today, that is the overwhelming emotion. But of course, Bishop Jakes, President Trump's second impeachment may pose a challenge to uniting the country. How do you believe President Biden can best overcome that obstacle in such a polarized nation?
You know, I think that that is too heavy a weight to leave totally at the doorstep of the president. I certainly think he's going to be a critical instrument, but that really plays out across the dining room tables of America, in the workplace, at the water cooler, on Instagram and Twitter, that all of us have a combined responsibility to restore the order and the dignity and the respect and some semblance of unity. We've never been totally unified, but some semblance of unity through which we might be able to go forward. I just wanted to interject that one of the powerful lines that I thought was important as he sent out a message to our international allies and associates. He said, "I promise not to lead by the example of our power, but by the power of our example." I thought that was such a wonderful statement, that we would not be bullies. And we don't intend to bully the nation. When we have domestic trouble of the magnitude that we have, we forget that the world is watching. And that's what I've also been concerned about. The world is watching. When you scale our walls and attack our hallowed grounds, you send a dog whistle out to terrorism around the world and nations around the world. That not only democracy here is at risk, but democracy around the globe has shaken under the tremors of what is going on in America. And I think that we are naive to think that we are in a vacuum, when in reality, we set the tone for democracy around the world. And that's why it is so critical that we own that responsibility in every facet, from the White House to our houses, to how we treat each other in the public square. All of that is going to be essential in the days ahead to restore order. The images will not be pleasant during this second impeachment. That on one hand, the virus on the other, the images will be troubling. And we have to maintain some hope that we will get through this together. I think the speech reminded us that we've been here before in many ways, but we have to perpetuate that message in our own mouths and our tweets and our social media, and all of us have a responsibility to assist whoever's in leadership in perpetuating a message of hope while we deal with despair.
We all have a responsibility, absolutely. Bishop T.D. Jakes, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Caitlin, I want to go back to you as we await the next step in today's ceremony, which is Biden's signing of the nomination papers, his first official documents as president. Give us some insight into why all of this pomp and circumstance, why this day is so important for Americans and for American history.
Well, this inauguration is unlike any that we've ever seen. We knew it would be different given the pandemic. We knew that they would be discouraging people from coming into town to watch these ceremonies because of the pandemic. But 2 weeks ago, because of the events 2 weeks ago, there is heightened security, to say the least, here in Washington, D.C. Over 20,000 troops are based here. That's more than serving in Iraq and Afghanistan at this moment. Every corner of downtown Washington is guarded by American troops at this time. So it feels very different. This is a situation where you had the mayor and other leaders here urging people not to come. Usually on Inauguration Day, this city is packed with people who have traveled from all over the country or even outside of the country to witness the new president and vice president. You would see them normally on the parade route, part of which is right here behind me, adoring fans cheering on the new president and vice president. That is not the situation, of course, at this time. But it is important to note that efforts to preserve some of the most critical elements of these ceremonies that are not just pomp and circumstance, but a reminder and an important showing of the fundamentals of our country, this peaceful transition of power, that still occurred. You saw President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris take their oaths of office. President Biden pledging to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Those words, I think, are now even more profound than ever, given the events of 2 weeks ago. And that was a really important, critical symbol, not only to Americans, but sending that message across the world that this is a resilient nation and a resilient democracy that perseveres and prevails. You will also see the inaugural parade. Now, it will look a little bit different. There will be virtual elements, but you will see the president and vice president and their spouses walk right here behind me before entering the White House. So trying to preserve some of these important traditions. And it's interesting, Tanya, also to kind of consider that, when you walk around Washington to the extent that you can, because it's blocked in most areas, you are seeing members of the National Guard, you're seeing the police force out front and center. But these images that you are seeing on your screen reflect kind of normal times. And that's really important too, that the images that Americans and those outside of this country too are seeing show that the goal of peacefully transferring power and the integrity of the election, I think really matters here. And that's what these photos, I think, represent.
Yeah, Kenneth, can you, elaborate on that a little bit? Because, of course, we are looking at, images of our nation's capital, the seat of our democracy. These are very, very important images. And as Caitlin pointed out, they are unusual images in that we don't see the huge crowds. We see very, very heightened security, which some have likened to a police state. Unfortunately, that is the situation we are in, considering what happened there just 2 weeks ago. But how important are these rites and rituals to a national psyche, to a national American populace that is trying to heal, trying to diffuse some of the heated passions we've seen in any presidential election? This one was particularly contentious, but you could argue that any presidential election passions are heated. Is this a moment to let all of those passions diffuse and die out and remind everyone that we are all Americans?
Absolutely. I think that the ritual and the pomp and the circumstance are all richly important today, perhaps today more than ever before. And I keep coming back to 1861 because it's the only comparable presidential inaugural in any respect. Abraham Lincoln had to come into Washington, D.C. in secret. He was actually removed from one train and took another train secretly. He was actually derided for that in the press. There were cartoons about him coming into Washington, D.C. for his inaugural in disguise. So we do have a history of a capital under duress. Remember, several states had already seceded by the time he took the inaugural that day in March of 1861. There were armed troops guarding the Capitol back then. Not a state of complete shutdown like this, but certainly a high state of alert. And Lincoln did something then very symbolic. They told him not to have the inaugural outside in front of the dome. The dome wasn't finished. And I think it was Senator Klobuchar who described very accurately that Lincoln said, no, I'm going to take it out here. The dome is unfinished, and I'm going to pledge to finish that dome because it's a symbol of what. So Lincoln understood this symbolism. I'm struck by a few of the other important symbols that we saw today. You mentioned the poetry. Extraordinary young Black woman giving a performance that will be remembered, I'm sure. The first poet to speak was Robert Frost at Kennedy's inauguration in 1961. And Frost, by the way, he had a poem prepared to read. It had snowed the day before. It snowed so much that they almost canceled the inauguration. But because there's so much snow and it was sunny, he couldn't read the poem, so he recited another poem by heart, and that began the tradition of the inaugural poet. But I'm struck by the difference in a way. Robert Frost representing one period in American history clearly, and this extraordinary young woman today representing a very new, younger, different, and multicultural America. Just this past week, I believe that was the outgoing Secretary of State, former Secretary of State, who talked about America not being multicultural. And I look at this ceremony today, and it's just, you can see how multicultural we are. The president, the vice president, and her husband, an interracial couple, this young woman speaking. It's an extraordinary moment of change in our country's history. And with all that change, I think that these symbols and the rituals we are going through say we are changing, but we still have some things that remain eternal. And I think that those things, and we can be very cynical about American history. Certainly I have been in my own career, but there is something noble and special about this moment. And it is a moment perhaps of, as many kids like to say, radical hope. And I always go forward with that sense of radical hope.
Interesting, though, to see the outgoing Secretary of State tweet criticizing a multicultural country. That was sort of a moment that also puts into stark relief how divided this country still is, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, do you want to believe what he has said in a tweet or whatever the platform was, or do you want to believe your eyes? And we can look at the people who participated today. We can look at the country around us and understand that this is a very, very different world that we are living in. It's certainly different from the world that Abraham Lincoln came to into his presidency as. It's very different from the world Franklin D. Roosevelt was inaugurated into in 1933, when he did tell us those famous words, all we have to fear is fear itself, unreasoning fear. And I think a lot of people are living with unreasoning fear and tremendous anxiety right now because of the virus, because of the racial injustice. The president outlined some of those difficulties we face. But essentially, the most important and perhaps most dangerous, the threat to democracy. We have seen democracy dodge a bullet. Democracy does not die in darkness, as the Washington Post would tell us, and I admire the Washington Post. Democracy often dies in broad daylight, decapitated in front of thousands as they cheer. Today, we saw the opposite of that, and I think that that's a very, very hopeful sign. And I hope that a lot of people who did watch these events today, even though they are not the crowds ringing the streets and thronging the streets, still understand that this was an
Thank you so much for spending your time with me. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you so much. And remember, through God, all things are possible to those who believe, as long as you're willing to receive what God has for you. Have an awesome, awesome day. I know I'll see y'all in the YouTube streets too, huh? Okay, here. My computer's moving slow. Uh-oh. Come here, girls.